The bridge of the starship felt cavernous in the silence. Jacqueline stood at the center of the deck, her boots clicking against the reinforced flooring with a hollow, echoing resonance. Before her, the command chair sat empty. It was not just a seat, it was a void. She traced the edge of the console with her fingertips, the metal cold and unyielding under her touch. Dust motes drifted through the dim cabin light, suspended in the stillness. She could almost see the phantom rhythm of the ship's pulse, the way the navigation monitors flickered in the dark. She did not sit. She stood, watching the stars drift past the observation port, each point of light a reminder of the vast, uncharted distance ahead. The air here was recycled, stale, and heavy, with the weight of decisions not yet made. She tightened her grip on the edge of the chair, her knuckles turning white. The mission was no longer a theory. It was a countdown. Every second that passed in this quiet room was a second lost to the encroaching shadows. She took a steadying breath, the sound sharp in the thin air, and braced herself against the console, waiting for the inevitable shift in the ship's rhythm. A sharp, rhythmic pulse of red light cut through the gloom. It flickered against the bulkhead, strobe-like and persistent. Jacqueline pivoted toward the secondary console as a high-frequency alarm pierced the quiet. The Rainbow team had bypassed the secure channel. She tapped the activation sensor. The console hummed, projecting a data stream that scrolled across the air in jagged crimson lines. Urgent reports flooded the interface. The mission parameters had shifted. Every line of incoming text confirmed the intelligence they had gathered over the last cycle. The window for their strike was narrowing. She watched the coordinates flash, her eyes tracking the rapid refresh rate of the sensors. The ship's internal fans kicked into a higher gear, a low-frequency vibration that traveled up through the floorboards. She reached out, swiped the data to the main view screen, and watched the map expand. The situation was no longer a theoretical threat, it was a tactical reality. She stood straight, her hands coming to rest on the controls. The weight of the command chair was no longer a shadow, it was an anchor. She turned her head toward the door, ready to summon the rest of the crew. Jacqueline tapped the bridge intercom, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum. The heavy blast doors slid open. Darius stepped onto the deck, his pace measured and rhythmic. He paced the length of the bridge, his gauntlets pulsing with a steady violet light. Each time he moved his hands, the air around his fingers shimmered, warping the light with the latent energy of dragon magic. He stopped near the center console, the hum from his equipment growing louder, vibrating the metal plating beneath his boots. Across the room, Scarlet stood at the navigation array. She did not look up. Her hands moved across the holoscreen with practiced speed, clearing secondary data layers to isolate the signal. She adjusted the trajectory inputs, her gaze locked on the flickering coordinates of Rocketra. The ship trembled as the engines aligned with her calculations. She tapped the final synchronization key, locking the destination into the primary drive. The bridge lights dimmed, shifting to the deep blue of hyperspace standby. Darius tightened his grip on his gauntlets, the hum reaching a sharp, constant pitch. The entire crew fell into a synchronized silence, their focus converging on the single point of light on the navigation grid. Elwin moved toward the edge of the navigation deck, his focus entirely on the small, metallic device in his palm. He held the Lullybot transmitter steady, his thumbs working the dials with precise, rapid movements. He adjusted the frequency knob until the internal indicator hit the center mark. Nothing happened. He shook the device, tapped the casing twice, and recalibrated the signal strength. A thin, high-pitched chirp finally cut through the low drone of the ship's engines. It was erratic at first, then settled into a rhythmic, pulsing code. Elwin listened, his brow furrowing as he translated the incoming data stream. The code chirped again, faster this time, signaling that the decryption protocols were holding against the planet's interference. He held the transmitter up toward the main view screen, allowing the device to broadcast the handshake signal to the ship's primary computer. The bridge console flickered in response, accepting the input. Elwin wiped his palms on his legs, satisfied. The link was active. He looked toward Jacqueline and nodded, his expression tight. The technical bridge was secure, But the complexity of the task ahead left no room for error. The ship held its course, waiting for the final countdown. The ship shuddered, the frame groaning under the sudden deceleration. Gravity flickered for a heartbeat, throwing everyone forward before slamming them back into their stations. Outside the viewport, the stars smeared into long, jagged streaks of light before snapping back into points of white. The vessel lurched violently to the left, caught in the gravitational shear of the planet's orbit. Jacqueline gripped the edge of the command console, her knuckles turning white as the floor vibrated beneath her. Sparks cascaded from a panel near the navigation array, filling the air with a sharp scent of ozone. Darius braced his boots against the metal grating, his gauntlets flaring with a sudden, uncontrolled burst of light to stabilize his stance. Scarlet scrambled to correct the drift, her hands flying across the controls as the ship groaned in protest. The alarms blared, a rhythmic, insistent pulse that echoed the pounding in their chests. Then, the violent shaking ceased. The ship leveled out, hanging motionless in the dark expanse. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. They had arrived. The ship hovered in the shadow of the planet, its engines cycling down to a low, ominous thrum. They were finally within reach, but the ship groaned once more, as if sensing the hostility waiting below. Jacqueline leaned forward, her hands hovering just above the glass of the main view screen. She tapped the interface, clearing the atmospheric distortion that had obscured the surface. The view expanded, revealing the truth of Rocketra. It was not a world, but a scar. Vast stretches of land lay blackened, the soil turned to gray ash that moved in sluggish, wind-blown waves. There were no forests, no rivers, and no signs of the civilization that once thrived there. Only jagged skeletons of buildings remained, hollowed out and leaning into the dust. The scale of the destruction was absolute. Darius stood beside her, his gaze fixed on a canyon where the earth had been fused into glass by intense heat. He did not move. Scarlet adjusted the sensors, but the readouts only confirmed the silence. There was no biological heat signature, no movement, nothing but the endless, cooling radiation of a dead world. Jacqueline felt the gravity of the sight, the weight of a planet turned into a graveyard. The air on the bridge grew thin, cold, and still. They had come for batteries, but they were looking at the consequence of total defeat. The mission was no longer just a retrieval, it was a race against the same fire that had turned the ground to glass. Scarlet zoomed the long-range sensors onto the ruins of the southern quadrant. A series of metallic shapes emerged from the dust, moving with a synchronized, cold precision. They were drones, dozens of them, hovering inches above the scorched ground. Their movement was devoid of hesitation or error, a relentless grid-pattern patrol that swept across every accessible path. Each unit emitted a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the ship's hull, a sound that felt like grinding teeth. Darius watched them, his fingers tightening into fists. The drones stopped, pivoted in perfect unison, and scanned the area with harsh, narrow beams of light that cut through the haze like scalpels. They were not defending the ruins, they were purging them. Elwyn adjusted the frequency on his transmitter, trying to isolate their command signal, but the drones shifted again, their formation tightening around the central vault coordinates. They were a wall of steel and programmed malice, an impassable barrier that demanded a direct confrontation. Jacqueline watched the feed, her eyes following the lethal, repetitive loops of the patrol. There was no way to bypass them. To reach the vault, they would have to break the machines, and the machines were designed to ensure that no one ever left the surface alive. The silence on the bridge deepened as the drone patrol completed another circuit. Jacqueline turned away from the display, but the image of the metallic swarm remained etched in her mind. She walked to the center of the deck, where the ship's internal stabilizers hummed. She held her palms out, fingers splayed. A faint ripple began to move through the air, unseen by the others. It started as a subtle vibration against her skin, then intensified into a distinct, rhythmic pressure. The wind currents outside the hull seemed to answer her movement, swirling in sync with the pulse in her chest. She felt the density of the atmosphere change, thickening as if the planet itself were bracing for an impact. It was more than a reaction. It was an alignment. Every gust of wind, every shift in the cabin pressure mapped directly onto her own reflexes. The tension in the room was no longer just the fear of the drones, but a mounting, kinetic energy that demanded release. She closed her eyes, sensing the turbulence of the landing zone through the air currents. The pressure climbed until it felt like the ship was held aloft by her own focus. She had become the conduit for the storm to come. The pressure in the room peaked, a physical weight that made the deck plates groan beneath their feet. Jacqueline kept her palms open, feeling the resistance of the air currents pushing back against her skin. She held the focus for a final heartbeat, then snapped her hands shut. The air instantly stilled, the artificial gravity returning to a steady, rhythmic pulse. She turned from the center of the deck toward the navigation array. Her eyes did not linger on the empty chair. She walked to the central console, her pace measured, and tapped the sequence to unlock the launch bay. The hum of the ship changed pitch, shifting from the steady drone of flight to the sharp, rapid-fire whine of a weapon system powering up. Darius moved to the airlock, his gauntlets pulsing with a steady, low-frequency resonance. Scarlet initiated the final descent vectors, her fingers dancing across the interface. Elwyn checked his harness, the transmitter chirping in short, clipped bursts. Jacqueline stood behind them, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the atmospheric monitors. The time for observation had ended. She looked at the team, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum with absolute precision. Deploy the landing pods. The bay doors retracted, and the internal lights dimmed, leaving only the harsh, red warning strobes to illuminate the deck. The pods ejected with a violent shudder that vibrated through the floor plates. Jacqueline braced herself as the craft plummeted toward the jagged horizon of Rocketra. Outside the viewport, the darkness of space vanished, replaced by the thin, wispy streaks of the upper atmosphere. Then, the friction took hold. The heat shields ignited, bathing the interior in a harsh, pulsing orange glow that made every surface shimmer. The air inside the pod grew heavy and scorched as the external temperature spiked. Jacqueline felt the G-force press against her chest, a relentless weight pushing her into the seat. The pods accelerated, the metal groaning under the immense stress of the dive. Outside, the orange glare intensified until it was all she could see, a wall of fire shielding them from the incinerating heat. She watched the altitude gauges spin rapidly toward zero. The craft rattled, every bolt strained to the limit by the atmospheric turbulence. She tightened her grip on the controls, compensating for the violent shakes as the pod banked sharply. A sudden, jarring impact signaled their entry into the thicker air. The orange light began to fade into a bruised, smoky gray. Through the swirling haze, the scorched ruins of the planet floor rushed up to meet them. The pod hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the dampeners venting steam as the hatch hissed open. Jacqueline stepped out first, her boots crunching into a thick layer of ash and pulverized concrete. The air here was thin, tasting of ozone and burnt earth. Towering piles of twisted rebar and shattered stone stretched in every direction, the skeletal remains of what was once a city. Darius vaulted over a jagged slab, his gauntlets casting a pale, flickering light across the debris. Scarlet followed, scanning the horizon for movement. Then, movement caught Jacqueline's eyes. Tucked deep within a collapsed basement, a group of figures huddled against a crumbling wall. They were covered in soot, their movements jerky and small. As the team approached, the locals pressed themselves further into the shadows, their eyes wide and darting. A child clutched a rusted metal pipe, trembling. The sight of them, fragile and desperate amidst the vast destruction, hit the team with the force of a physical blow. Darius lowered his guard, the hum of his magic fading to a soft, rhythmic throb. Jacqueline stepped forward, holding her hands open to signal she was not a threat. She looked at the ruin, then back at her team. The mission had changed. They were no longer just searching for batteries. They were the only force standing between these people and complete eradication. Jacqueline pulled a projector from her belt and cast a blue light into the center of the debris. The hologram flickered, displaying the skeletal grid of the enemy fortifications and the path toward the central vault. She traced the lines with her finger, her eyes scanning the topography of the ruined sector. The area was too vast to traverse as a single unit. Drones swarmed the perimeter, and the vault was buried beneath multiple layers of reinforced concrete. She looked at Darius, who stood ready with his gauntlets pulsing, then at Scarlet, who was already calculating the most efficient routes through the rubble. Elwyn stood at the edge of the holographic map, waiting for a signal to initiate his signal jamming protocols. Jacqueline realized that staying together would only draw the fire of the entire garrison. She stood upright, her posture rigid and focused. She pointed to the eastern sector, then traced a path toward the northern barricade. Darius, Scarlet, take the eastern flank. Clear the path. Elwyn, keep your frequency locked on their grid. I will handle the aerial suppression from the high ground. The team moved instantly to their positions. By dividing, they forced the enemy to spread its resources thin. Jacqueline watched them vanish into the ruins, the weight of the command settling into her movements as she prepared to ascend. Darius and Scarlet moved low through the jagged architecture, the sound of rhythmic mechanical whirring growing louder with every step. They reached the edge of the perimeter where a wall of reinforced alloy blocked the path to the vault. A dozen drones emerged from behind the barricade, their optical sensors glowing in the gloom. They opened fire instantly. Lasers scorched the ground, sending plumes of concrete dust into the air. Darius shoved Scarlet behind a fallen pillar, the heat of the passing plasma searing the surface of the stone. He did not wait for the barrage to cease. He raised his hands, the air around his gauntlets distorting as he drew upon the latent energy. With a sharp, guttural shout, he slammed his palms against the ground. A wave of force erupted outward, slamming into the metallic barricade. The impact was deafening. The alloy buckled, twisting and snapping as the magic tore through the structural joints. The barricade disintegrated, sending shrapnel flying across the clearing. The drones were tossed aside like discarded toys, their internal circuits sparking as they hit the debris. Darius stood amidst the wreckage, his breathing heavy, his focus already shifting to the next line of defense. The path was open, and the way forward was clear. Elwyn knelt behind a stack of rusted containers, his focus entirely on the flickering interface of his transmitter. The screen displayed a cascade of cascading data streams, each one a thread of the enemy communication grid. He ignored the distant sound of explosions where the others were fighting. He needed to find the master node. Suddenly, the interface turned crimson. The drone network had detected his intrusion and was actively rewriting its encryption keys. Elwyn tapped the keys with rapid, precise movements, his eyes tracing the shifting code. He redirected the signal, forcing the network to accept his override. The system stalled, then flickered. He tapped once more, and the entire grid went silent. Across the ruins, the remaining active drones froze in place, their optical sensors dimming as their connection to the command center severed. The heavy electromagnetic barriers that had guarded the vault entrance hummed once and then retracted into the floor. Elwyn stood up, his gaze shifting to the path he had cleared. The network was now a hollow shell. He signaled the team that the way was open, his movements calm despite the adrenaline surging through his system. The tactical advantage was theirs, and the central vault stood vulnerable, waiting for them to claim what was inside. Jacqueline pushed off the ground, the air beneath her feet thickening into a solid, invisible platform. She rose above the jagged ruins, her palms outstretched as she felt the shifting currents of the atmosphere. Below, the ground team moved toward the vault, but a fresh wave of drones swarmed from the shadows. They tracked her movement, their weapons cycling up with a high-pitched whine. A dozen bolts of searing plasma erupted toward her in a synchronized volley. Jacqueline did not dodge. Instead, she swept her arms in a wide, rhythmic arc. The air surged, bending the trajectory of the incoming fire. The laser bolts hit an invisible wall of pressurized wind, scattering harmlessly into the sky like sparks from a fire. She maintained the pressure, her focus locked on the drones below. With a sharp downward motion, she tightened the vortex, creating a localized gale that slammed the drones into the rubble. The remaining units lost their target lock, their sensors spinning in confusion. Jacqueline held her position, a living shield suspended in the smoke-filled air. She looked down at the team, her movements steady and precise. The path was clear, and the air around her allies remained undisturbed by the fire that raged mere inches away. The heavy fire ceased as the team converged on the massive, reinforced structure at the center of the ruins. Jacqueline descended from the air, her feet striking the cracked pavement with a soft thud. Darius and Scarlet stepped out from the debris, their movements synchronized and alert. They looked up at the vault entrance, a colossal slab of metal that stood untouched by the decay surrounding it. A strange stillness hung over the area, far sharper than the chaos they had just navigated. Jacqueline gestured for the team to fan out, her hands signaling a final sweep of the perimeter. Darius checked his surroundings, his grip tight. Scarlet stood by the primary locking mechanism, her fingers hovering near the interface. They had arrived, yet the air felt heavy with the weight of what waited behind the door. No drones patrolled this sector, a silence that signaled either total security or a trap waiting to be triggered. They gathered at the threshold, the metal of the vault cool and unyielding under their touch. Jacqueline looked at each of them, noting the exhaustion and the resolve in their eyes. They stood on the precipice of the final objective, the mission's culmination, locked behind a single, formidable barrier. With a sharp nod, they prepared to breach the entrance. The heavy blast doors groaned as they retracted into the floor, revealing a chamber bathed in a rhythmic, pulsing blue light. Jacqueline stepped over the threshold first, her boots silent on the cold metal grating. The room was vast, dominated by a central pedestal that held the Chronos batteries. They glowed with an intensity that seemed to push back the shadows of the vault, casting long, wavering shapes against the walls. The air here was thin, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that settled deep in the chest. Darius and Scarlet flanked her, their eyes locked on the steady, periodic flash of the energy cells. Elwyn moved forward, his hands twitching as he sensed the raw power radiating from the core. The light washed over their faces, turning the surrounding darkness into a distant memory. They stood motionless, surrounded by the only technology capable of altering the timeline. Every pulse of the blue light felt like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. They were closer than they had ever been to the objective. No one spoke. The mission had demanded everything from them, and here, in the center of the ruins, the solution hummed with a life of its own. They drew closer, their movements slow and deliberate, drawn by the pull of the light that held the future of humanity within its arc. Jacqueline extended her hand toward the central pedestal. The blue light flared, reflecting off her skin as she reached the final few inches. Her fingers were inches from the cold surface of the canisters when the light abruptly vanished, not flickered, vanished. A massive, unnatural shadow slammed into the chamber, swallowing the blue glow and plunging the vault into absolute ink-black darkness. The rhythmic hum of the batteries ceased, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her eardrums. Jacqueline pulled her hand back, her breath hitching in the sudden freezing draft that swept through the room. Darius shifted his weight, the sound of his boots scraping against the metal floor echoing like a gunshot in the void. Scarlet reached out, her hand brushing the wall, but there was no structure left to hold only empty, freezing air. The vault, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb. They stood back to back, straining to see through the oppressive dark, but the shadow was absolute. It was not just an absence of light, it was a presence. Something massive had positioned itself directly between them and the surface, sealing the exit and turning the air cold enough to burn. They were no longer alone. A metallic screech tore through the vault, louder than anything they had encountered on the surface. Jacqueline tilted her head back, her eyes widening as the ceiling began to warp and buckle. Above them, the sky was no longer a patch of gray ruin. It was being erased. A vast, dark shape descended with a slow, deliberate gravity that made the very air feel thick. As the Zion flagship settled, its immense hull blocked the light, turning the daylight into a permanent, artificial twilight. The sheer scale of the vessel was impossible to comprehend. It occupied the entire horizon, a monolith of cold, unyielding iron that dwarfed the ruins and the team alike. Darius stepped forward, his hand pressing against a pillar that began to shudder under the immense weight of the ship's proximity. Scarlet stared upward, her expression hardening as the ship's perimeter lights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the vault floor. They were no longer just intruders in a wasteland. They were insects beneath the boot of an unstoppable force. The mission, which had felt like a calculated strike, now felt like a desperate gamble against an extinction-level threat. The sky was gone, replaced by the underbelly of their enemy, and the realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. There was nowhere left to run. The descent ended with a final, jarring impact that traveled through the bedrock. The ground did not just shake, it groaned. A rhythmic, low-frequency pulse surged from the flagship's landing thrusters, turning the solid floor into a vibrating hazard. Jacqueline slammed her palms against a support pillar to stay upright as the stone under her boots cracked in spiderweb patterns. Dust rained from the ceiling, choking the air and stinging their eyes. Darius staggered, his gauntlets sparking as he struggled to maintain his center of gravity against the violent swaying of the deck. Beside him, Scarlet lost her footing, sliding toward the edge of the central dais before grabbing the rim to anchor herself. The vault was tearing itself apart. Debris showered down, clattering against the metallic canisters that held their only chance at survival. Every vibration felt like a hammer strike against the planet's crust. They were trapped in the epicenter of a tectonic shift caused by the sheer mass of the enemy vessel. Jacqueline watched the walls warp, the stone buckling under the impossible strain. The trembling grew more erratic, shifting from a steady hum to a violent, jolting tremor that threatened to bury them alive. She locked her gaze on the blue light of the batteries, forcing her breathing to match the chaos around her. They held their ground, waiting for the final, inevitable strike. The violent tremors faded into a low, menacing hum. Jacqueline did not wait for the dust to settle. She stepped toward the central dais, her hands rising in a sweeping arc. She drew a deep breath, pulling the air toward her with a sharp, outward motion. The atmosphere inside the vault shifted instantly. A low whistle rose to a scream as the air began to rotate, gathering speed in a tight, narrowing circle around her palms. Dust, loose gravel, and shards of stone were snatched from the floor, pulled into the orbit of her command. She pushed her fingers outward, and the wind erupted into a full-scale vortex. The air turned into a wall of solid pressure, shredding the debris into a fine mist that spiraled upward. The swirling current widened, forming a protective funnel that pushed the stagnant air of the vault away. Jacqueline stood at the eye of the storm, her arms rigid, channeling the flow of kinetic energy into a steady, roaring column. The wind buffeted the walls, clearing the path ahead and forcing the heavy, stagnant atmosphere to yield. She held the vortex in place, the sheer force of the wind anchoring her stance against the floor. The vault interior blurred behind the rotating veil, leaving only the blue pulse of the batteries visible at the heart of the storm. She was the anchor, and the room was the storm. The vortex centered itself over the dais, the air pressure dropping until the silence became deafening. Jacqueline narrowed her focus, extending her palms downward. She forced the wind beneath the heavy canisters. The metal groaned against the stone, resisting the lift. She braced her legs, driving her heels into the floor until the concrete cracked under the pressure. Her muscles locked, rigid as iron, as she fought the immense weight of the batteries. Slowly, the canisters shifted. They scraped against the mountings, emitting a high-pitched screech of metal on metal. Jacqueline gritted her teeth, veins standing out on her neck as she poured every ounce of her endurance into the rising column of air. The canisters tilted, then tore free from the vault interface. They hovered, suspended in the swirling center of the vortex. She did not relax. The weight pulled at her, dragging her arms down, but she held the position. Sweat beaded on her brow, cold and sharp. The air around the batteries crackled with blue static, feeding the vortex and pushing the canisters higher. She kept the column steady, her entire body trembling with the exertion of maintaining the lift. Above the dais, the canisters remained locked in midair, caught in the invisible grip of the storm she had created. The vault doors slammed open. A flood of soldiers poured into the chamber, their weapons leveled at the center of the storm. Darius didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his gauntlets glowing with a jagged, amber light. He slammed his fists into the lead soldier, the impact throwing the attacker backward into the incoming rank. Behind him, Elwyn moved with frantic precision, his fingers dancing across the transmitter interface. He pulsed a high-frequency signal that scrambled the drone's targeting sensors, causing them to fire blindly into the walls. Metal clattered against stone as Darius traded heavy blows, his knuckles sparking with each strike. He planted his feet, creating a human barricade between the encroaching soldiers and the suspended batteries. A soldier rushed Elwyn, but Darius pivoted, delivering a crushing blow to the soldier's chest plate that sent him sprawling across the debris. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, yet they did not yield an inch of ground. Each time a soldier broke the line, Darius or Elwyn met them with a brutal, mechanical efficiency. The air in the vault grew thick, with the smell of ozone and burnt plastic. They fought back to back, a wall of iron and focus, ensuring the swirling vortex above remained undisturbed. Every second was a hard-won victory against the tide, their movements synchronized in a desperate, rhythmic dance of survival. Jacqueline released the vortex, and the batteries dropped into her waiting hands. The weight was immense, dragging her shoulders down instantly. "Move!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the collapsing vault. They turned as one, sprinting toward the extraction point. The floor beneath them shuddered, a massive ceiling beam crashing down to block the main exit. Darius slammed his shoulder into a reinforced side hatch, his gauntlets tearing through the locking mechanism. They scrambled through the narrow gap, the canisters clattering against the metal frame. Behind them, laser fire raked the corridor, searing the walls and sending sparks showering over their heads. Elwyn stumbled as a blast struck the floor near his feet, but he surged forward, his boots pounding against the vibrating deck. The extraction point lay ahead, a shimmering aperture in the shadows. Every step required maximum effort, the batteries pulling at their grip with a strange, gravitating hum. They navigated a gauntlet of twisted piping and shattered consoles, leaping over fissures that opened in the deck. The ship groaned, the hull integrity failing under the relentless bombardment. They pushed their speed, lungs burning, feet sliding on the debris-strewn floor, closing the distance to the gate as the entire structure tilted toward the abyss. The flagship loomed over the extraction site, a mountain of dark metal blotting out the horizon. A dozen turrets swiveled in unison, their barrels glowing with gathering energy. A volley of red beams slammed toward the team. Jacqueline planted her feet, palms extended, and pushed a concentrated wall of wind into the path of the incoming fire. The beams hit the vortex and shattered, scattering into harmless sparks that rained down like fireflies. The air crackled with static, the wind screaming as it struggled against the sheer volume of energy. Beside her, Darius and Elwyn sprinted, their boots kicking up clouds of dust as they navigated the cratered ground. A second wave of fire erupted from the flagship, deeper and more intense. Jacqueline dropped to one knee, her hands clawing at the air, dragging the swirling currents to form a dome. The laser fire struck the barrier, bending and whipping around her team, carving deep furrows into the earth at their heels. Every redirection sent a shockwave through the atmosphere, forcing the team to brace against the sudden shifts in pressure. Through the veil of light, she locked eyes with the extraction point. She held the gate open with a final violent gust, pushing the energy back toward the sky as the team lunged forward. The warp gate stood before them, a towering ring of flickering light embedded in the jagged rock. Elwyn slammed his hand against the console, his fingers dancing over the interface to lock the coordinates. The device emitted a low, bone-deep hum that vibrated through the ground. Above, the Zion fleet banked hard, their main cannons charging with a sound like tearing metal. A barrage of plasma fire slammed into the perimeter, turning the dirt into molten glass. Jacqueline lunged toward the gate, her hands hovering inches from the activation pad, channeling her focus to stabilize the fluctuating energy field. Darius and Scarlet formed a perimeter, their weapons firing in short, rhythmic bursts to keep the approaching drones at bay. The gate sputtered, the light fading to a dull amber. Elwyn growled and bypassed the primary circuit, forcing the connection with a surge of raw power. The ring groaned, the hum rising in pitch until it became a physical pressure against their eardrums. The air inside the circle swirled into a vortex of indigo light. The fleet fired again, the sky turning white with incoming bolts. They stood on the edge of the threshold, the gate's suction pulling at their gear. The path to safety finally open. The sky shattered. The Zion flagship leveled every primary battery, saturating the entire sector in a blinding cascade of white-hot plasma. The ground erupted behind the team, rock and debris vaporizing instantly in the concussive heat. Jacqueline shoved Darius and Elwyn toward the shimmering indigo center. The suction of the gate clawed at them, pulling their bodies forward with relentless force. Just as Scarlet cleared the threshold, a massive bolt of energy struck the base of the gate, sending a shockwave that buckled the surrounding terrain. The air turned to static, biting at their skin. They didn't look back. They leaped, their forms blurring and stretching as they hit the event horizon. Behind them, the warp gate collapsed inward, a singular point of light folding into nothingness. The Zion fleet unleashed their full payload into the empty space where the team had stood seconds before. The resulting explosion tore through the atmosphere, a silent bloom of fire and distortion that consumed the landing site. Inside the warp, the chaotic roar of the planet faded to a rhythmic, steady pulse. They were gone, leaving the scorched wasteland to burn in the wake of their exit. The jump locked, the distance between them and their pursuers becoming absolute. The warp gate spat them out onto the metal floor of the Starship bridge. The transition was violent, a sudden stop that sent them sprawling across the deck plates. Then, silence. Not the silence of a vacuum, but the low, steady hum of the ship's life support systems. The air here was cool and smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen. Jacqueline pushed herself up, her palms scraping against the grating. She checked her hands, then looked around the bridge. Darius was sitting against the navigation console, his gauntlets dimming as the residual energy bled away. Scarlet remained by the array, her fingers tracing the screen, verifying the jump coordinates. Elwyn slumped over his transmitter, his breathing ragged but slowing. No alarms blared, no plasma fire hammered the hull. The ship held steady in the drift of deep space. Jacqueline stood, her legs shaking, and crossed the room to where the others were recovering. She caught Darius's gaze. He nodded once, a sharp movement that signaled he was whole. She turned to Scarlet and Elwyn. They were alive. The tension that had held their muscles rigid for hours began to break, their shoulders dropping, their gazes softening into a shared recognition of the distance they had crossed. The ship felt different. The weight of the mission still pressed down, but the immediate threat had vanished, leaving them in the quiet aftermath of the storm. Jacqueline walked to the center of the engine room. She held the Kronos batteries, their blue glow casting sharp, rhythmic shadows against the bulkheads. She reached the time machine, a massive frame of intersecting steel and conduits. The housing was cold, unresponsive, and dark. She slid the first battery into the primary slot. A mechanical click echoed through the chamber, followed by a faint, high-pitched whine as the energy cells engaged. She pushed the second battery into place. The machine groaned. A ripple of blue light surged across the console, causing the floor to vibrate beneath her boots. Sparks showered from an overhead conduit, but she did not flinch. She locked the final connection, twisting the manual release until it seated with a heavy thud. The entire room went silent for a single, breathless second. Then, a low-frequency hum began to rise, vibrating through the deck plates and into the soles of her feet. The blue light intensified, bleeding out from the core and illuminating the faces of the crew watching from the doorway. The energy was no longer static. It pulsed with a steady, rhythmic heartbeat that signaled the machine was ready. The potential of a new future filled the air, thick and heavy with the weight of the victory they had paid so much to secure. Jacqueline turned away from the engine room and walked back to the bridge. Her footsteps echoed against the metal floor, the only sound in the quiet vessel. She reached the command chair. It sat empty, a piece of furniture that had defined the mission for as long as she could remember. She stopped, staring at the console, then placed her hand on the armrest. The material felt cool beneath her palm. She sank into the seat. As her weight settled, the ship responded. Panels flickered to life, the navigation array hummed, and the bridge lighting adjusted to her presence. Darius, Scarlet, and Elwyn stood at their stations, waiting for her command. She did not look for instructions from anyone else. She looked at the star map, her fingers tapping a sequence into the glass. She felt the ship shift, the thrusters firing in perfect alignment with her intent. The shadow of the past faded as she focused on the vector ahead. She leaned back, her grip firm on the controls. She was no longer looking for a path carved by others. She was the one holding the course. She pulled the lever, and the ship surged forward into the dark, leaving the struggle behind to meet the silence of the void with a steady hand.